The dust cloud on the horizon was the first sign that something was wrong. Jeremiah Blackwood saw it just after dawn. He was on his porch, the Colorado air crisp and cold, a ceramic mug of coffee warming his hands. He'd seen 1,000 sunrises from this exact spot, watched his Blackwood ranch grow from a patch of raw dirt into the finest horse breeding operation in the territory. He knew the rhythms of this land. He knew the way the dust kicked up from a herd of cattle, or the slower, more deliberate cloud from his men riding out for the day. This was different. This cloud was moving too fast, too tight. It moved with the terrifying speed of a prairie fire, a singular entity consuming the plains. He froze, the coffee mug halfway to his lips, his eyes straining to pierce the morning haze. It wasn't a stampede. It was something else, something impossible. He reached for the old brass telescope his grandfather had carried at Gettysburg. As he brought the planes into focus, the scene snapped into a detail so sharp, so unbelievable, it made his breath catch in his throat. A lone figure was riding at the head of the cloud, not on a saddle, but bareback on a wild mustang, a beast of pure muscle and fury. And behind this rider, following with an unnatural discipline, was a herd of 12 other untamed horses. The very same herd his best cowboys had spent 2 brutal weeks trying and failing to round up. The rider moved like water, a fluid extension of the horse beneath him. No bridle, no reins, just a subtle shift of weight here, a light touch on the neck there. They guided the herd through treacherous terrain, rocky outcrops and sudden dips that would have broken the leg of a shod horse. This was a masterclass in horsemanship that defied every rule Jeremiah had ever learned. The rising sun caught the rider's skin. It was the color of rich copper. Long black hair streamed behind them like a battle standard. Jeremiah adjusted the focus, his knuckles white on the brass. The rider was young, impossibly young, with the lean, hard build of someone who had lived their entire life in the wild. But then he saw it, the detail that sent a tremor through his entire world, the one thing that shattered every assumption he held. The rider was a woman. She guided the dozen wild mustangs toward his eastern pasture, with movements so subtle they seemed telepathic. The horses, animals that had fought his men with tooth and hoof, now moved in a perfect, graceful formation. Their wild spirits weren't broken. They were harmonized. "Boss, you seeing this?" Tommy Hartwell, his youngest ranch hand, stumbled out of the bunkhouse, his shirt half-buttoned. His eyes were wide as dinner plates. "I'm seeing it," Jeremiah muttered, lowering the telescope. "But I don't believe it. Who was she? And how was she commanding a herd of wild animals that his seasoned wranglers had declared untouchable?" He watched as she brought the entire herd to a gentle stop near the water trough at the edge of his property. She slid from her mount with a liquid grace that was more like a cat than a human. She wore simple buckskin leggings and a worn cotton shirt. Turquoise stones, the color of a captured sky, hung around her neck. Jeremiah had built his empire on understanding horses. He knew their fears, their instincts, their language, or so he thought. Watching this young woman move among 12 tons of untamed animal flesh made him feel like a first-year apprentice. She ran her hands along their necks, speaking to them in a low musical language he'd never heard. And the horses, these savage beasts, stood perfectly still. They leaned into her touch. Apache, one of his other men, Colt Stevens, whispered from behind him. He'd come out with Magnus Rodriguez, the ranch foreman. Both men were weathered, tough, and utterly speechless. "Has to be. Look how she handles them." Jeremiah nodded slowly. The Apache were legends, the greatest horsemen the plains had ever known. But they had been forced onto reservations hundreds of miles south years ago. To find one here, on his land, with his horses, this wasn't just trespassing. This was something far more complicated. As if she could feel their eyes on her, the woman turned. She looked directly at the ranch house, at the 3 men standing there like statues. There was no fear in her eyes, only a calm, intelligent assessment. She was calculating odds. Then she started walking toward them. She moved with a measured, confident stride, leaving the herd to drink peacefully. Her approach wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't submissive either. It was the walk of someone who believed they had every right to be exactly where they were. As she drew closer, Jeremiah saw she was even younger than he'd thought. No more than 20, but her eyes held the ancient weight of someone who had seen too much. "Morning," she said. Her English was perfect, without a trace of an accent. That was the second impossibility of the day. "Beautiful horses you have running wild on your land." The sheer nerve of it almost made Jeremiah laugh. No apology, no explanation, just a simple, direct statement. "Those horses don't belong to me," Jeremiah replied, choosing his words carefully. "Wild mustangs belong to whoever can catch them." "Seems you've done that." A faint smile touched her lips, and it transformed her entire face. For a split second, the hardened survivor was replaced by a radiant young woman, and it did something strange to Jeremiah's chest. "Catching isn't the same as understanding," she said. Her gaze flickered past him, toward his corrals. "Your men have been trying to round up this herd for 2 weeks. I watched them from the ridge." The casual bombshell landed with a thud. She'd been watching his ranch. For 2 weeks. A ghost on his own property. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air snaked down his spine. What else had she seen? "You've been watching us?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "Hard not to notice," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "When horses are screaming and men are cursing loud enough to wake the dead, horses don't respond to anger. Your men bring nothing but—" Tommy and Colt shifted their feet, the truth of her words stinging the air. Their frustration with that herd had become a running joke, a source of bruises and broken gear. "What's your name?" Jeremiah asked. "Ayanna," she said. "Ayanna Crowfeather." "Jeremiah Blackwood, this is my ranch." He gestured to the sprawling property, his life's work. "My men, Tommy, Colt, and Magnus." She gave a respectful nod to each of them, but her focus returned instantly to Jeremiah. She was sizing him up, and he got the distinct feeling he was being judged by a standard he didn't understand. "Your horses are well cared for," she said, looking at his prized breeding stock. "Good bloodlines. You understand domesticated animals?" It felt like a test. "I've been working with horses my entire life," he said. "Built this ranch from nothing after the war." Her eyes seemed to pierce right through him. "The war changes a man," she said softly. "Some learn to build. Others only know how to destroy. You chose to build." The observation was so accurate, so personal, it felt like a physical blow. He never spoke of the war, not to anyone. How could this stranger, this girl from the wilderness, see the defining scar on his soul so clearly? "What do you want, Ayanna Crowfeather?" he asked, his voice softer now. Her proposal was as direct and surprising as her arrival. "Permission to water these horses on your land," she said. "In exchange, I'll train them. All 12. You keep 6, I take 6. Everyone benefits." Train them? His men couldn't even get a rope near them. Train them how? Instead of answering, she just turned and walked back toward the mustangs. Jeremiah and his men followed, a strange mix of skepticism and awe keeping them silent. They were about to witness something they would never forget. Ayanna walked toward the lead stallion, a magnificent black beast, nearly 17 hands high, with a spirit as wild as a thunderstorm. This was the horse that had nearly killed Magnus last week, the one they called the Devil. He was worth a fortune, if he could be broken. She stopped about 10 feet away from him. She didn't make a move. She just stood there, breathing. Deep, slow, rhythmic breaths. The stallion watched her, his ears pinned back, his body coiled like a spring, ready to charge or flee. Minutes crawled by. The only sound was the wind whispering through the grass. Then, slowly, imperceptibly, the horse began to change. His ears flickered, then swiveled forward. His rapid, panicked breathing deepened. The tension seemed to flow out of him, draining into the earth. Ayanna took one slow step forward. The horse didn't move. Another step. Nothing. She continued this patient, silent dance until she was standing right beside the most dangerous animal on the plains. When she reached out her hand, the stallion didn't flinch away. He leaned into her touch. Tommy let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "How?" he whispered. "Patience," Ayanna said, her voice a low murmur, her eyes never leaving the horse. "And respect. You approach them with force. They see a predator. They will fight or they will run. Neither helps you. You must ask, not demand. She wasn't breaking him. She was having a conversation. She was using a language of trust that Jeremiah had never known existed. Your men try to break horses, she explained, running her hand along the stallion's powerful back. To break something is to destroy it. I ask for a partnership. It is stronger in the end. Within an hour, she had a simple rope halter on the stallion. An hour. It would have taken his men a month of brutal, dangerous work to get that far, and they would have been left with a terrified, resentful animal. This horse was calm, willing. Where did you learn this? Jeremiah asked, his voice rough with disbelief. From my grandfather, she said, and from the horses. You learn more by listening than by shouting. She slipped the halter off. The stallion didn't run. He nudged her shoulder, asking for more. Magnus, a man who had been training horses for 40 years, just shook his head. I've never seen anything like it. So, what's your offer again? Jeremiah asked, his mind reeling with the possibilities. I train all 12. You keep 6, fully trained to work with your men. The other 6 come with me. It was a ridiculously generous offer. She was providing a service worth thousands of dollars, just for the right to keep half the animals. But it meant having her here, on his ranch, for weeks, months maybe. It meant this unsettling, magnetic woman would be part of his daily life, a woman who could read his soul and tame the untamable. How long would it take? He asked. 6 weeks for a basic saddle train, 3 months for a true working partnership. 3 months, 3 months of watching her, of learning from her, of trying to ignore the way the morning light made her skin glow. Where would you stay? The question came out sounding more concerned for her than he'd intended. There's an old line shack in the canyon, 2 miles east, she said. I've been using it. It's safe. She'd been living 2 miles away, alone in the wilderness, for weeks. An Apache woman, alone. It was unheard of. It was incredibly dangerous. Her solitary life hinted at a story she wasn't telling, a reason she was cut off from her people. That canyon is on my land, he pointed out gently. I know, she said, her gaze steady. I was hoping we could reach an accommodation. Her directness was a force of nature. No games, no manipulation. Just the simple truth. Why are you here, Ayana? He asked, the question coming out more bluntly than he'd planned. For the first time, a shadow crossed her face. A flicker of pain, of vulnerability. Winter is coming, she said. The reservation is no longer an option for me. I need a safe place. I need time. The words were carefully chosen, but they spoke volumes. She was in exile. Whether by choice or by force, she was alone in a world that was hostile to her very existence. He looked at her, this proud, capable woman, and saw the subtle brace in her shoulders. She was preparing for him to say no. My men might have concerns, he said, thinking of the talk it would cause in town. An unmarried white rancher living with a young Apache woman. Your men are welcome to their concerns, she replied, her confidence returning. Concerns don't change the quality of my work. He made his decision. It wasn't a business decision. It was something else, an instinct he couldn't ignore. All right, 6 weeks to start. We'll see how it goes. A wave of relief washed over her face, so fast he almost missed it. Thank you. Conditions, he said, trying to regain a professional footing. You work with my men. No trouble with the neighbors. And, you eat 1 meal a day at the main house. With us. That surprised her. That's not necessary. It's not negotiable, he said, the words coming out with a surprising firmness. He tried to soften it. My late wife, Sarah, always said good business starts with a full stomach. Besides, Magnus is the best cook in Colorado. You'd be missing out. A real smile broke across her face, a full, unguarded, breathtaking smile. It was like the sun breaking through the clouds. In that case, she said, I accept. Tomorrow morning, dawn, he said, extending his hand. She took it. Her grip was firm, her skin roughened by work. But her touch sent a jolt through him. a spark of warmth that had nothing to do with a business deal. It was a connection, brief but powerful, that left him feeling completely unmoored. She turned and walked back to the horses. With a single fluid motion, she was on the lead mare's back. With a series of soft calls and gestures, she led the entire herd away, a river of wild horse flesh flowing toward the eastern canyon. "Boss," Tommy said, his voice quiet. "You sure about this?" "No," Jeremiah admitted. "Not at all." But as he watched her disappear into the morning mist, he knew one thing for sure. His life had just changed forever, and the real trouble hadn't even started yet. The next 2 weeks were a revelation. Every morning, Jeremiah would stand on his porch and watch Ayanna work. She moved with a hypnotic patience that seemed to bend the will of the wild horses to hers. The black stallion, the devil, now followed her around like a lost puppy. A fiery red mare that had kicked Magnus so hard he'd cracked 2 ribs, now allowed Ayanna to lift her hooves without a twitch. It was magic. It was a miracle. But watching her was also a kind of torture. The professional distance he'd tried to establish was crumbling day by day. Their shared evening meals in the ranch house became the highlight of his day. He learned about her grandfather, a great shaman and horse whisperer. She learned about his dream of building the Blackwood Ranch. They talked about horses, the stars, the changing seasons. They talked about everything except the 2 things that hung unspoken in the air between them: why she was really here, and the crackling energy that sparked whenever they got too close. He found himself making excuses to ride out to the eastern pasture, just to watch her, to bring her a cup of coffee. He learned to read the subtle shifts in her smile, the deep intelligence in her eyes, and he started to feel something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. A dangerous, thrilling flicker of life in a part of his heart he thought was buried for good. One morning he rode out to find her with a troubled look on her face. "Morning, Jeremiah," she said, accepting the coffee he offered. Her smile was there, but it didn't reach her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Problems with the horses?" "The horses are fine," she said, patting the neck of a paint gelding who now wore a saddle calmly. "He'll be ready for a rider by the end of the week." She took a sip of coffee, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Riders came to my camp last night. 3 of them. Not from around here." A knot of ice formed in Jeremiah's stomach. "What did they want?" "They were asking questions," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "About Apache movements, raiding parties, stolen livestock." He knew exactly what this meant. There were always rumors. Anytime a cow went missing or a fence was cut, the first people to be blamed were the Apache. It was a convenient, ugly prejudice. "I told them I live alone, that I have no contact with any tribes," she continued, "but I'm not sure they believed me." She looked at him directly, her expression grim. "Jeremiah, my being here, it could bring trouble down on you. I can leave. The deal is off." The thought of her leaving hit him with the force of a physical blow. The ranch would feel empty. His days would feel empty. "You're not going anywhere," he said, the words rougher than he meant. "This is your home until the job is done." "You don't understand the risk," she insisted. "If they decide I'm a raider, they won't just come for me. They'll come for you for helping me." "Let me worry about my risks," he said. But even as he said it, he knew this was about more than just a business arrangement. He was protecting her because the thought of anyone harming her had become unbearable. Before she could argue, they heard the sound of approaching horses. It was Tommy and Magnus, and they were riding fast. Their faces were pale. "Boss!" Tommy called out. "Visitors at the main house. 3 men. They're asking for you." He paused and his eyes flicked nervously to Ayanna. "They said they're here about the Apache woman." Jeremiah saw Ayanna's body go tense. "The same men from last night?" he asked her quietly. She nodded once, her eyes hard and focused. She was a warrior preparing for battle. "You stay here," Jeremiah ordered. "I'll handle this." "No," she said, her voice firm. "Hiding me will only make them more suspicious. It will make you look guilty. We face them together. We show them there's nothing to hide." She was right. But the thought of putting her in a room with men who already saw her as a criminal made his blood run cold. These weren't just concerned citizens. These were men who hunted other men for a living. "Ayanna," he said, his voice low, These could be bounty hunters, marshals. They can arrest you on suspicion alone. Then we give them no reason for suspicion, she said. She untacked the gelding with steady hands, her movements deliberate and calm. Come on, rancher. Let's go show them how boring horse training is. As they walked toward the ranch house, Jeremiah felt a cold dread settle over him. He admired her courage, but he feared it wouldn't be enough. This wasn't a fight you could win with logic or skill. This was about prejudice, and that was a beast far wilder than any Mustang. The three men waiting on his porch were exactly as he'd feared. Hard eyes, cheap suits, and the unmistakable air of government authority. Their leader stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, I'm Deputy Marshal William Crawford, he said, his eyes flicking from Jeremiah to Ayanna and back again. We're investigating reports of Apache raids. We understand you have an employee. The way he said the word employee made it sound like an accusation. This is Ayanna Crowfeather, Jeremiah said, keeping his voice level. She's a horse trainer, the best I've ever seen. Crawford's gaze settled on Ayanna. It was a cold, dissecting stare. Miss Crowfeather, there have been livestock thefts in the area. We have reason to believe it's an Apache raiding party. Do you have any information for us? No, sir, Ayanna replied, her voice polite but firm. I've been living alone for months. I have no contact with any tribes. Living alone? Crawford's eyebrow arched. Unusual for an Apache woman. What circumstances led to that? Jeremiah could feel the tension radiating from Ayanna. This was the question she didn't want to answer. Personal circumstances, she said, her voice tight. One of Crawford's men, a younger, arrogant man named Hayes, stepped forward. Personal circumstances? Like maybe you got kicked out for helping those raiders? Jeremiah's hand clenched into a fist. But Ayanna answered before he could speak, her voice dropping to an icy calm. Personal circumstances like choosing to live my own life, instead of accepting an arranged marriage to a man I despise, she said. The words were a quiet defiance, a glimpse into the past she was running from. I left. I chose to make my own way. Horse training gives me that freedom. Convenient story, Hayes sneered. The truth often is, she shot back. You can verify my work. Ask Mr. Blackwood about the progress with his horses. Raiders don't spend their days building trust with animals. Crawford's sharp eyes darted between them, sensing the protective wall Jeremiah had put up around her. Mr. Blackwood, are you vouching for her? 100%, Jeremiah said without hesitation. Her character and her work are impeccable. That's a lot of trust to put in a stranger, Crawford mused. I trust skill when I see it, Marshal. I don't care what race it comes in. The third man, who had been silent, finally spoke. We'd like to see this skill. Gladly, Ayanna said, a challenge in her eyes. What followed was a masterclass. Ayanna moved from horse to horse, demonstrating a level of training that was simply astonishing. The wild mustangs responded to her voice, her touch, her mere presence. They moved with a calm and a grace that seemed impossible for animals that had been running free just 2 weeks ago. Crawford's skepticism slowly melted away, replaced by a professional respect. Even Hayes looked grudgingly impressed. Impressive, Crawford admitted. Most breakers I know would need 6 months to get these results. Impressive training doesn't mean she's not sneaking out at night, Hayes grumbled. You are welcome to search my camp, Ayanna offered coolly. You'll find my bedroll, my cooking pot, and my hunting bow. No stolen goods, no signs of anyone but me. Crawford considered it, then shook his head. That won't be necessary, for now. The threat hung in the air. Your work explains your presence here, but we'll be increasing patrols. Any unusual activity, you report it to us immediately. Of course, Jeremiah said. As they mounted up to leave, Hayes paused and gave Jeremiah a look that was pure poison. A word of advice, Blackwood. Be careful who you associate with. Getting tangled up in Indian affairs, it can ruin a man's reputation and his business. The veiled threat was the last straw. I understand politics just fine, Mr. Hayes, Jeremiah said, his voice dangerously low. I also understand that judging a person by their race instead of their character is the fastest way to start a war. Hayes just smirked. Friendly advice. They rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and tension behind them. Well, Ayana said with a shaky exhale, that could have gone worse. It could have gone better, Jeremiah countered. Hayes has a problem with you. With us. Men like that don't give up. He looked at her, at the worry she was trying to hide behind a brave face. Are you having second thoughts? Are you? She asked, turning the question back on him. No, he said, the answer coming with a certainty that surprised him. No second thoughts. Hayes can go to hell. You have a job to finish. A real smile, the first one since the marshals arrived, lit up her face. In that case, she said, we should get back to work. But as they walked back to the pasture, a new, unspoken understanding passed between them. This was no longer just a business deal. They were allies. They were partners. And they had just made a very dangerous enemy. The world was closing in, and Jeremiah knew, with a chilling certainty, that the visit from the marshals wasn't the end of their problems. It was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of peace and foreboding. On the surface, life on the ranch was better than ever. The horses were progressing at a miraculous rate, and Ayana's gentle methods were starting to influence even the most cynical of Jeremiah's men. Tommy had become her devoted student, and even old Magnus was grudgingly admitting that the Apache girl knows a thing or two. The ranch was more efficient, the animals calmer, but underneath it all, a current of dread was flowing. The marshals had been true to their word. Patrols became more frequent, their presence a constant silent accusation. Every trip into town was an ordeal of cold shoulders and suspicious stares. Rumors were spreading like wildfire, painting Jeremiah as a sympathizer and Ayana as a dangerous criminal. Hayes had done his work well, and the bond between Jeremiah and Ayana was becoming an undeniable force. Their conversations now stretched late into the evening, long after the plates were cleared. He told her about Sarah, about the grief that had hollowed him out for years. She told him more about her past, about the man she'd been promised to, a cruel and powerful warrior named Koga, and how she'd fled rather than become his property. They were two lonely souls finding a fragile shelter in each other's company. The attraction was a living thing between them now, a silent, powerful magnetism. A brushed hand while passing a bridle, a shared look across a fire-lit room. Each moment was charged with a meaning that went far beyond friendship. But they never crossed the line. The world outside was too dangerous, their situation too precarious. Then one crisp autumn afternoon, the fragile peace shattered. Jeremiah was in the north pasture, checking a fence line, when he heard it. The sound of galloping horses, riding too fast, too hard. It was the sound of a hunt. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through him. He spurred his own horse, racing toward the sound, a terrible premonition twisting in his gut. He crested a ridge overlooking the eastern canyon, and what he saw stopped his heart. Ayana. She was trapped. 4 men had her cornered against a sheer rock wall. Her horse was gone. They must have run it off. She was on foot, crouched behind a large boulder, clearly desperate. The men were circling her like vultures, their voices ugly and sharp on the wind. Come on out, girl. We know you're in on the Patterson raid. Stop making this hard on yourself. Jeremiah's blood ran ice cold. These weren't marshals. These were vigilantes, drunk on self-righteousness and the promise of a reward. He pulled out his telescope, his hands shaking with rage. He recognized one of the men, a loudmouth rancher named Jed, whose property bordered his. They were armed to the teeth. Ayana's voice, though strained, rang out clear and defiant. I don't know anything about a raid. I'm a horse trainer. Apache lies, Jed shouted back. Patterson's lost 50 head of cattle. Someone's gonna pay. Jeremiah didn't hesitate. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but the instincts were still there, buried deep. 4-1 were terrible odds, especially with Ayana in the middle. A direct charge was suicide. He needed an advantage. He needed to be a ghost. He wheeled his horse around, using the rocky terrain to circle wide, coming up behind them, the wind in his face. He moved with a stealth he hadn't used since the war, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He dismounted about 50 yards away, creeping forward on foot, his old Winchester rifle feeling heavy and familiar in his hands. From his new position, he could see the situation was even worse than he'd thought. One of the men was advancing on Ayana's position on foot, his rifle leveled. They were closing the net. "Last chance, Apache," the man growled. "Come out now, or we're coming in after you." Another man laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "What's the matter, Blackwood's pet? He not here to protect you?" The way he said it, dripping with insinuation, made Jeremir's vision go red. They weren't just going to hurt her. They were going to humiliate her first. They saw her as less than human, an animal to be cornered and broken. He had seen this kind of hate before, on bloody battlefields, and he would not let it touch her. He would burn the world down first. He raised the Winchester, the cool metal of the stock pressed against his cheek. He centered the iron sights on the chest of the man closest to him. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "That's far enough." The four men spun around, shock and fear on their faces. They hadn't heard him, hadn't sensed him. He was a phantom with a rifle, and he had them dead to rights. "Blackwood," Jed stammered. "What the hell? We're conducting a citizen's arrest." "I see what you're doing." Jeremir's voice was a low, deadly growl. "You're terrorizing an innocent woman. Now get on your horses and ride off my land before I forget I'm a civilized man." The man on foot swung his rifle around, trying to use Ayana's position as a shield. It was a fatal mistake. Jeremir's aim shifted instantly. "You even think about it, and your friend here is the first to die," he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. The man froze. Jed tried to bluster. "It's 4 against 1, Blackwood. Don't be a fool." A grim smile touched Jeremir's lips. "You're right. The odds aren't fair." He sighted down the barrel, his finger tightening on the trigger. "For you." The standoff stretched for a tense eternity. The air was thick with the promise of violence. Jeremir could hear his own heartbeat, a steady, lethal drum. He was ready. He would kill them all to keep her safe. But then the unthinkable happened. Ayana stepped out from behind the boulder. Her hands were raised in a gesture of peace, but her eyes were blazing with fire. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that made all 5 men look at her. "No one needs to die today." "Ayana, get back!" Jeremir yelled, his focus momentarily broken. "No," she said, her eyes locking with Jed's. "This ends now. You accuse me of a crime? Then ask your questions. But you will do it without guns." Her sheer, breathtaking courage stunned them all into silence. She was unarmed, surrounded, and yet she was the one in command. Jed, seeing a chance to save face, lowered his rifle slightly. "All right, smart girl. Where were you 3 nights ago? When Patterson's cattle were stolen?" "I was in my camp, in the canyon," she said calmly, "where I have been every night for 2 months. Mr. Blackwood can confirm it." "A convenient alibi from your lover," one of the other men sneered. The insult landed, but Jeremir didn't let it distract him. Ayana, however, didn't even flinch. "The truth is not an alibi," she said, her voice cutting. "You want to find the real thieves. Look for men who know how to move 50 head of cattle without a sound. That takes skill. It takes planning. Or it takes inside knowledge. Have you considered that Mr. Patterson's own men might be involved? Or did you just find it easier to blame the Indian?" The direct hit landed. Jeremir could see the doubt creeping into their faces. Her logic was a weapon, and she was wielding it with surgical precision. The confrontation was at a tipping point. The vigilantes were losing their conviction, their mob mentality faltering under the weight of her reason and his rifle. Then Jed said something that changed everything. He squinted at the turquoise necklace Ayana wore. "Wait a minute," he said slowly. "I've seen that necklace before." He stared at her, a strange look of dawning recognition on his face. You're the one Koga is looking for." The name hit Ayana like a physical blow. All the color drained from her face. The warrior, the confident negotiator, vanished. In her place was a terrified young woman. Jeremir's mind raced. Koga, the name she had told him in confidence. The cruel man she had fled from on the reservation. Jed started to laugh, a triumphant, nasty sound. Well, well, well. There's a $1,000 bounty on your head, girl, from your own people, for stealing a sacred horse. A bounty. It wasn't about the cattle at all. It was never about the cattle. This was a lie, a cover story. They were bounty hunters using the stolen cattle as an excuse to hunt her down. And now they had her. The odds had just gotten impossibly worse, and Jeremiah realized with a sinking horror that his rifle might not be enough to get them out of this alive. Because now, it wasn't just about prejudice, it was about a fortune. The revelation hung in the air, heavier and more dangerous than any threat of violence. $1,000 bounty. That kind of money could make a man do anything. Jed and his crew weren't vigilantes anymore. They were businessmen about to collect a massive payday. Koga put that bounty out? Ayana whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. The fear in her eyes wasn't for the men in front of her, but for the man they represented. He sure did, Jed gloated, his confidence surging. Sent riders to every town in the territory, looking for a girl with a sky-blue necklace who stole the tribe's prize stallion. Says you disgraced his name. He grinned, showing a row of yellow teeth. $1,000 is a whole lot more than Patterson's offering for a few cows. Looks like it's our lucky day. Jeremiah's mind was a whirlwind. This changed the entire equation. These men wouldn't be reasoned with or scared off now. Greed was a more powerful motivator than hate, but it also gave him a sliver of an opening. So you admit it, Jeremiah said, his voice ringing across the canyon. The cattle raid was a lie. You've been hunting her from the start. We heard a rumor about an Apache girl on your ranch, Jed admitted, his rifle still held loosely. Figured we'd use the Patterson mess as an excuse to come have a look. And here you are. He gestured to Ayana. The prize. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. The marshals, Hayes and his particular venom. He must have heard the bounty rumors too. He wasn't just a prejudiced lawman. He was likely trying to get in on the action himself, to claim Ayana and the bounty for the government. It was a race, and Jed's crew had just taken the lead. The horse I rode, Ayana said, speaking to Jeremiah, her voice low and urgent. The lead mare. She wasn't a wild Mustang. She was mine, a gift from my grandfather. Koga claims she was a sacred horse belonging to the tribe after my grandfather passed. It was his excuse to own her and to own me. It wasn't just an arranged marriage she'd fled. It was theft and tyranny. She was a refugee, not a criminal. It's a tribal matter, Jed sneered, not our concern. All we care about is the bounty. Now, Blackwood, you can put the gun down and walk away. We'll even give you a cut for your trouble, $100, for not getting yourself killed. $100 to sell her soul, to sell her. The rage that filled Jeremiah was a pure white-hot fire. The only thing you'll get from me is a bullet, he snarled. He knew what he had to do. There was no negotiating. There was no escape. There was only one path out of this canyon, and it was going to be paved with blood and gunpowder. Ayana, he said, his voice low but clear. On my mark, you run. Run back to the rocks. Don't stop. Don't look back. Jeremiah, no. Run. He didn't wait for her to agree. He fired. The shot wasn't aimed to kill. It was aimed to shock. He put a bullet into the dirt right at Jed's feet, spraying gravel and dust into the air. In that split second of confusion, as the bounty hunters flinched from the unexpected shot, Ayana bolted. She moved like a deer, sprinting back toward the relative safety of the boulder field. The canyon erupted into chaos. Gunshots echoed off the rock walls as the other three men opened fire. Jeremiah dropped to one knee, firing again, this time for real. He caught one of the men in the shoulder, sending him spinning off his horse with a cry of pain. 2 down, 2 to go. Jed and the remaining man dove for cover, returning fire. Bullets whizzed past Jeremiah's head, chipping stone from the rocks he was hiding behind. This was a real firefight now, the kind he hadn't been in for 10 long years. But the terror, the muscle memory, it all came flooding back. He was a soldier again. He could hear Ayana scrambling through the rocks behind him, putting distance between herself and the fight. Good. As long as she was safe, he could do this. He risked a glance. Jed was trying to circle around to get a better angle. The other man was laying down suppressing fire, a classic flanking maneuver. They were experienced, but so was he. Jeremiah waited for a lull in the shooting. He took a deep breath, then broke from his cover, sprinting 10 yards to a different rocky outcrop, giving him a new line of sight. The move surprised them. Before the man providing cover could adjust his aim, Jeremiah had him in his sights. He fired once. The man crumpled. Now it was just him and Jed. "You're a dead man, Blackwood!" Jed screamed, his voice raw with fury and fear. He was firing wildly now, his greed replaced by pure panic. Jeremiah stayed low, reloading his Winchester with calm, practiced movements. He knew Jed's position. He also knew that a direct assault was too risky. He had to draw him out. "It's over, Jed," he called out. "Your friends are down. The bounty is gone. Ride out of here now, and you get to live." "Not without the girl," Jed roared back. Jeremiah's heart sank. He wouldn't give up. Not as long as he thought he had a chance. He had to end this. Now. He looked around, his soldier's eye assessing the terrain. To his left, there was a steep, gravelly slope. It was unstable. An idea, a desperate, dangerous idea, formed in his mind. He spotted a large, precariously balanced rock at the top of the slope, right above Jed's position. It was a crazy long shot, but it was the only one he had. He took aim. He wasn't aiming for Jed. He was aiming for the small cluster of pebbles supporting the larger rock. He exhaled, steadied his hands, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the pebbles with a sharp crack. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, the large boulder shifted. It tilted, then began to roll, gathering speed, dislodging a cascade of smaller rocks and dirt. A miniature landslide. "Jed, look out!" Jeremiah screamed, a warning he didn't have to give. Jed heard the rumble. He looked up, his eyes wide with terror. He tried to scramble away, but it was too late. The river of rock and earth slammed into him, burying him completely. Silence. The sudden, deafening silence of the canyon was broken only by the sound of a few pebbles trickling down the slope. Jeremiah stood up slowly, his rifle held at the ready. His body was thrumming with adrenaline. He scanned the area. The two men he'd shot were wounded, but alive. Jed was gone. The fight was over. "Ayanna?" he called out, his voice hoarse. She emerged from the rocks, her face pale, her eyes huge. She looked at the scene of carnage, at the wounded men, at the fresh mound of earth. She looked at Jeremiah, who stood there covered in dust, the smell of gunpowder clinging to him like a shroud. She ran to him. She didn't say a word. She just threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, her body shaking with tremors of relief and shock. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, his own heart hammering against his ribs. In that embrace, holding her against the backdrop of the violence he had just unleashed to protect her, the last wall around his heart finally crumbled. The professional distance, the unspoken rules, the fear, it all melted away. All that was left was this woman, his partner, the person he had just been willing to kill and die for. But as he held her, a new, colder fear crept in. They had survived, but Koga was still out there. The bounty was still active. They had won the battle, but the war for her freedom, for their future, had just declared itself. And their enemies were no longer just ignorant vigilantes. They were now facing the full wrath of a powerful, vengeful man and the long, greedy arm of his bounty. They couldn't stay here. The Blackwood Ranch was no longer a shelter. It was a target. They were officially on the run. The ride back to the ranch was a blur of grim purpose. They tied up the two wounded bounty hunters, leaving them for the marshals to find along with the story of a pack of thieves who had turned on each other. It was a thin story, but it was the best they could do. They needed to buy time. At the ranch, the atmosphere was thick with dread. Jeremiah gathered his men. "We're leaving," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "All of us. Pack your essentials. We're driving the herd north. Tonight." Magnus's weathered face was a mask of confusion and concern. "Boss, what is this? What happened out there?" Jeremiah looked at Ayanna, who stood beside him. Her composure returned, but her eyes still holding the shadow of her fear. "Ayanna is being hunted," he said simply, "by her own people. There's a bounty on her head, a big one. The men in the canyon were bounty hunters. More will come. This ranch isn't safe for her anymore, which means it's not safe for any of us." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Colt spoke up. "So we just run? Abandon the ranch?" "We aren't abandoning it," Jeremiah said. We're protecting it, and we're protecting one of our own." He looked around at the faces of his men, Tommy, Magnus, Colt. "Ayana is part of this ranch now. An attack on her is an attack on all of us. We leave together, or we stay and we fight together." Tommy stepped forward without a second's hesitation. "I'm with you, boss, all the way." Magnus looked at Ayana, his old skepticism long gone, replaced by a fierce, paternal respect. He just nodded once. "We ride." Colt was the last to agree, but he did, his loyalty to Jeremiah overriding his fear. They moved with frantic efficiency: food, ammunition, medical supplies. They were preparing for a long, hard journey into the unknown. Ayana worked alongside them, her movements swift and silent. She gathered the 6 horses she had trained, her half of the deal. They were more than just animals to her. They were her family, her only connection to a home she could never return to. As they worked, Jeremiah pulled her aside. "Ayana, where does Koga have his power? Where would he look for you?" "He controls the tribal council now that my grandfather is gone," she said, her voice low. "His influence is strongest to the south, on the reservation lands. But his bounty hunters will be everywhere. They will look for a lone Apache woman. They won't be looking for a woman traveling with a white rancher in his entire crew, moving a herd of horses." A plan was forming in Jeremiah's mind. A desperate, audacious plan. "We're not just going to run," he said. "We're going to hide in plain sight. We're going to join a cattle drive, a big one. Lose ourselves in the crowd." It was a gamble. A big cattle drive was a world of its own, a river of men and animals flowing across the plains. It offered anonymity, but also 100 new dangers. As dusk fell, they were ready. The Blackwood Ranch, Jeremiah's life's work, stood silent and empty behind them. Ahead lay the vast, unforgiving wilderness. They rode out, not as a ranch crew, but as fugitives. Jeremiah rode at the front, Ayana beside him, his men and the herd of horses following behind. The first few days were a tense, exhausting blur. They pushed north, avoiding towns, traveling under the cover of darkness whenever possible. Every distant dust cloud, every campfire in the night was a potential threat. Jeremiah saw the toll it was taking on Ayana. She barely slept, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon, her hand never far from the knife on her belt. The bond forged between them in the canyon had deepened into something quiet and profound. There were no words for it yet, but it was there in the way he made sure she ate, the way she would take watch beside him in the dead of night, sharing a silent cup of coffee. They were in this together. Her fight was now his fight. After a week of hard travel, they found what they were looking for: the massive trail of the Goodnight-loving cattle drive, a sprawling, moving city of over 2,000 longhorns and 100 cowboys heading north toward Wyoming. Bluffing their way in was easier than Jeremiah expected. They were experienced hands with a string of fine-looking horses. The trail boss, a grizzled old man named Shaw, hired them on the spot, no questions asked. They were swallowed up by the sheer scale of the operation. They became just 4 more faces in the crowd, 4 more hands pushing cattle north. For a time, it seemed to work. The constant work was grueling but honest. Ayana, with her unparalleled skill with horses, quickly earned the respect of the other cowboys. They stopped seeing her as an Apache woman and started seeing her as one of the best wranglers on the drive. She and Jeremiah carved out a small pocket of normalcy in the heart of the chaos. They started to let their guard down. They started to hope. And that's when he appeared. They were 2 months into the drive, deep in Wyoming territory. A new group of riders joined the drive, bringing fresh supplies. And leading them was a man whose presence made the air turn cold. He was Apache, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He wore the clothes of a white man, but he moved with the predatory grace of a wolf. His eyes, black and merciless, scanned the camp, and when they landed on Ayana, a cruel, possessive smile spread across his face. Ayana froze, the color draining from her face. "Koga," she breathed, the name a curse on her lips. He hadn't sent bounty hunters this time. He had come himself. Koga dismounted, ignoring everyone else. His eyes locked on Ayana. He walked toward her, not with the haste of a man seeking a reunion, but with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man reclaiming his property. Jeremiah stepped in front of her, placing himself between them. His hand rested on the Colt revolver at his hip. "That's far enough," he said, his voice a low growl. Koga's eyes flickered to Jeremiah, dismissing him as an irrelevance. "This is a tribal matter, white man. It does not concern you. The woman is coming with me. She stole a sacred horse. She must face justice. The only justice she'll face is at the end of my gun if you take another step," Jeremiah replied, his body tense. The entire camp had gone silent. 100 cowboys were watching, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. The trail boss, Shaw, pushed his way through the crowd. "What in tarnation is going on here?" he demanded. "This man is trying to kidnap one of my crew," Jeremiah said, never taking his eyes off Koga. "She is my betrothed," Koga announced, his voice booming across the camp. "She fled from her duties. She is a thief. There is a bounty for her return." Shaw looked from Koga to Ayana, then to Jeremiah. He was a practical man, a man who hated complications. "Is this true, Blackwood? Is there a bounty on her?" "It's a lie," Ayana said, her voice finding its strength. "He wants my grandfather's horse. He wants me. He twisted our laws to make me a criminal." "An Apache matter is an Apache matter," Shaw said, his face grim. "I don't want tribal law on my drive. Settle it, now." He was washing his hands of it. He wouldn't help them. They were on their own. Koga smiled. He had brought 4 of his own men, all of them armed and dangerous looking. It was 5 against 4, in the middle of a camp full of neutral and likely hostile onlookers. "I will not fight you, white man," Koga said to Jeremiah, his voice laced with contempt. "I will challenge you, a trial by combat, according to your laws, a duel. You win, I leave and renounce my claim. I win, I take what is mine." A duel. It was a mad, archaic custom. But in the lawless world of a cattle drive, it was as good a law as any. It was a public spectacle, a way to settle a dispute without a full-scale battle that would disrupt the drive. Jeremiah looked at Ayana. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also a flicker of desperate hope. He was her only shield. "I accept," Jeremiah said. Koga's smile widened. He had wanted this. He was a famed warrior, renowned for his skill with a knife. He thought this would be an easy victory, a way to humiliate the white man who had protected his prize. But Jeremiah had a condition. "Not with guns," he said, his eyes hard as steel. "No knives, hand to hand. Just you and me. The way real men settle things." It was the ultimate gamble. Koga was younger, bigger, a fearsome fighter. But Jeremiah had survived the Civil War. He had fought in trenches, in muddy fields, in desperate, brutal hand-to-hand combat. He knew how to fight when the rules were gone. Koga's eyes narrowed. He was surprised, but his pride would not let him refuse. "You are a fool," he said. "I will break you." "We'll see," Jeremiah replied. The cowboys formed a wide circle in the center of the camp. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the dusty ground. This was it. The final stand. Everything, Ayana's freedom, their future, their very lives, would be decided in this circle of dirt. Jeremiah stripped off his shirt. His body was lean, corded with the muscle of a lifetime of hard work, and crisscrossed with the pale, thin lines of old scars. He looked across the circle at Koga, who stood like a bronze statue, his powerful body radiating arrogance and menace. There were no rules. The first man to surrender, or the last man standing, would be the victor. They began to circle each other, 2 predators sizing each other up. Koga was faster, more agile. He feinted, testing Jeremiah's reflexes. Jeremiah was patient, his stance solid, his energy conserved. He was waiting for his moment. Koga lunged, a lightning-fast jab aimed at Jeremiah's face. Jeremiah deflected it, but the force of the blow was staggering. Koga followed with a brutal kick to the ribs that sent Jeremiah stumbling back. The crowd murmured. Koga pressed his advantage, unleashing a flurry of powerful, vicious strikes. Jeremiah was on the defensive, blocking, dodging, taking blows that felt like they were cracking his bones. He was outmatched in raw strength and speed. He knew he couldn't win a straight fight. He had to be smarter. He had to be meaner. He took another hit, this one to the jaw, and let himself fall, rolling with the punch. Koga, thinking he had him, moved in for the finishing blow, a triumphant sneer on his face. It was the opening Jeremiah had been waiting for. From the ground, he kicked out, not at Koga's body, but at his knee. His heel connected with a sickening crunch. Koga screamed, a sound of pure agony, and his leg buckled. The arrogant warrior was now a wounded animal. Jeremiah was on his feet in an instant. The fight was no longer about skill, it was about survival. He drove his shoulder into Koga's chest, sending them both tumbling to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, a desperate tangle of limbs, trading brutal, ugly blows. Koga was strong, even injured. He got his hands around Jeremiah's throat, his thumbs pressing down, cutting off his air. Jeremiah's vision started to swim in black spots. He was losing. He was dying. His flailing hand found a rock on the ground, a fist-sized piece of granite. With the last of his strength, he swung it, connecting with the side of Koga's head. Koga's grip loosened. Jeremiah swung again, and again. Finally, Koga went limp. He lay on the ground, beaten and unconscious, but alive. Jeremiah staggered to his feet, his body a symphony of pain. He was bruised, bleeding from a dozen cuts, his ribs screaming in protest. But he was standing. He had won. He looked up and saw Ayana's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. He walked toward her, stumbling, and she met him halfway, holding him up. The crowd of cowboys was silent, their faces filled with a new kind of respect. He had faced down a monster and won. He looked at Koga's men. They were staring at their defeated leader, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. "Take him," Jeremiah gasped, his voice a ragged whisper, "and get out of this camp. If I ever see any of you again, I will kill you." They didn't need to be told twice. They hoisted Koga's unconscious body onto a horse and rode out into the night, disappearing into the darkness. It was over. For real this time. The bounty was broken. The monster was defeated. Jeremiah, leaning on Ayana, looked around at the faces of his men, at the stars beginning to appear in the vast Wyoming sky. They had lost a home, but they had found something else, a family, forged in fire and loyalty. He looked at Ayana, at the woman he loved, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight. Her freedom was won, and their future, once a distant, impossible dream, was now spread out before them, as wide and open as the plains themselves. He had started as a man rebuilding his life from the ashes of war. He had found a partner in a woman who was fleeing a war of her own. Together they had faced down the darkness, and against all odds, they had won. If you enjoyed this story of courage and justice on the frontier, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the wild and untamed West. Let us know in the comments below what you think Jeremiah and Ayana will do next.